The moment Preston Hale's wedding fell apart, he was standing at the altar of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, surrounded by 400 of Chicago's most powerful people, holding the hand of a woman who was already letting go. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and Elena Russo was sitting in the back of that room, quiet, composed, wearing a dress the color of midnight, watching the man who had tried to destroy her understand all at once that she had been 3 steps ahead of him from the very beginning. This is the story of how she got there, and why Dante Ferraro, who had never once in his life looked at a woman the way most men look at a weapon, with fear dressed up as desire, couldn't take his eyes off her. Elena Russo was a forensic accountant who worked contracts that other firms wouldn't touch. She was 34 years old, built with the kind of presence that filled a room without apology. Wide-shouldered, full-figured, the type of woman who made office chairs look like thrones. She had spent 11 years following money through shadow corporations, shell accounts, and the beautiful lies that powerful men told on paper, and she was very, very good at it. Preston Hale had known her for 3 of those years. He had been her client first, then her partner, then the man she thought she might build something real with. What he had actually been was someone who used her access to financial records he couldn't legally obtain himself, and when he was done using her, he made sure the exit cost her as much as possible. The announcement came through a mutual contact on a Tuesday afternoon. Preston Hale was engaged to Serena Whitmore, of the Whitmore family, heiress to the largest private real estate portfolio in Illinois. The wedding date was set for 6 weeks out. The venue was the Whitmore Grand Hotel's Gold Ballroom, 400 guests, florists flown in from Paris, and a guest list that included, through some particular cruelty of overlapping social circles, Elena herself. She wasn't surprised. She was supposed to be destroyed. Preston knew exactly what he was doing. The Whitmore name was everything he had ever wanted and never been able to claim on his own. Marrying Serena wasn't just ambition, it was a message. A monument built specifically so Elena would have to look at it. He had proposed within 11 weeks of their final conversation. That kind of speed is not love, it is a response. What Preston did not know, what he had never bothered to find out because men like him mistake silence for surrender, was that Elena had been watching him for 2 years, not out of grief, out of professional habit. And what she had found in his financial records was not a man ascending. It was a man drowning very carefully, in very expensive clothes. She accepted the wedding invitation. The gala where they crossed paths again was 6 days before the ceremony. A charity dinner for the Chicago Arts Council, held in the penthouse of the Meridian Tower. Elena arrived alone, in a charcoal blazer and tailored trousers, her dark hair pinned up in something that looked effortless and took 40 minutes. She had a glass of sparkling water and was reviewing something on her phone when she heard Preston's voice cut across the room. He had already seen her. That was the point. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve," he said, loud enough. He was with 4 people, business associates, the kind of men who smiled at discomfort. Coming to events where people actually know who they are, that must take real courage, or maybe you just don't notice when you're out of your depth. He let his eyes move over her once, slowly, the way people do when they want you to feel like inventory. "Still carrying the same weight, I see. Some things don't change." The people around him laughed, quietly, the way people do when they're embarrassed to be doing it. Elena looked up from her phone. She held his gaze for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "You look tired, Preston," and returned her attention to her screen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shake. The stillness she held in that moment was not the stillness of a woman who has gone numb. It was the stillness of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the paperwork to clear. Psychologists describe this kind of response through what Dr. Dasher Keltner at UC Berkeley documented in his research on status and social dynamics. Individuals who maintain physical composure under public attack are consistently perceived by observers as holding higher social standing than their attacker, regardless of what is actually being said. The audience in that room registered something even if they couldn't name it. Preston had just attacked a woman who didn't flinch, and somehow he looked smaller for it. One person in the room had watched the entire exchange without moving. Dante Ferraro was standing near the east window with a glass of scotch, and the particular stillness of a man who has learned that watching carefully costs less than speaking too soon. He was 41 years old, ran 3 legitimate businesses, and considerably more that weren't, and had been doing business with the Whitmore family long enough to be on the guest list without anyone questioning it. He watched Preston Hale's performance. He watched Elena's response, and something shifted behind his eyes that he wouldn't have been able to articulate yet. What he knew, instinctively, was this: that woman had just been hit, and she had not bent. He intended to find out why. What he didn't know yet was that what he had witnessed was not control and not composure alone. It was something rarer. It was a woman who already held the ending in her hands and was simply letting the story catch up. He found her on the balcony 20 minutes later. Not orchestrated. She had stepped out for air, and he had followed because something about the way she moved made the room feel smaller when she left it. "You know Hale," he said. "I did," Elena said. Past tense. "You didn't react." "I reacted," she said. "You just weren't watching for the right things." Dante studied her. "Ferraro," he said. "I know who you are," Elena said. "Dante Ferraro. Legitimate holdings in shipping, hospitality, and commercial real estate. Less legitimate holdings in things that don't appear on paper." He raised an eyebrow, 1 degree. "You did your homework." "I do everyone's homework," she said. "It's what I'm paid for." They stood in silence for a moment, the city spread out below them like a diagram. Then Dante said, "What are you doing at Hale's wedding?" Elena turned to look at him for the first time directly. "Attending," she said. Dante Ferraro had built an empire on reading people accurately, and what he read in Elena Russo's face in that moment was not grief, not revenge, and not the hollow performance of someone trying to seem unbothered. It was patience. The deep architectural patience of someone who has constructed something that does not need her to be loud to function. He didn't ask her anything else that night, but he made sure she had his number before she left. The wedding day arrived with the precision of a planned detonation. 400 guests filled the Whitmore Grand Ballroom. Serena looked luminous in $12,000 of ivory silk. Preston stood at the altar with the expression of a man who has finally gotten everything he wanted and is already calculating what comes next. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke. Everything was exactly as designed. 40 minutes before the ceremony, Elena had walked into the hotel's business center, opened her laptop, and sent 3 emails. The first went to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Attached to it were 27 months of documented records showing that Preston Hale had been using his financial advisory firm to route funds through accounts that did not belong to his clients. The amounts were not small. The paper trail was meticulous. The second email went to Serena Whitmore's personal attorney, a woman named Clara Voss, who had been managing Serena's interests independently of her family for 6 years. Attached to it was a separate document showing that Preston had established a holding account in Serena's name 18 months before the engagement, funded through transfers that had no legitimate business origin and had been drawing from it at a rate that suggested the marriage was a financial strategy, not a personal one. The third email went to a financial journalist at the Chicago Tribune who had been trying to report on irregularities in Preston's firm for 8 months without enough documentation to publish. Elena closed her laptop, smoothed her dress, and walked into the ballroom with 4 minutes to spare. She sat in the 3rd row from the back, next to a column where she could see everything. The ceremony was 11 minutes old when Clara Voss entered from the side door, walked directly to Serena, and bent to whisper something in her ear. Serena went perfectly still. Then she looked at Preston. And he must have seen something in her face that he recognized, the look of a person who now knows what you actually are, because his smile started to go wrong before she said a single word. What happened next took 4 minutes and dismantled 12 years of Preston Hale's social architecture in front of everyone he had ever cultivated as a witness. Serena did not make a scene. She simply said, "I need a moment," and stepped back from the altar. Clara produced documents. Preston's lawyer tried to speak. Someone in the front row pulled out a phone. And then a separate commotion began near the entrance, because 2 men in suits had arrived with paperwork of a different kind entirely. The kind that requires a signature and has a case number at the top. Preston turned. He scanned the room. His eyes found Elena in the 3rd row. John Gottman, after 4 decades studying the mechanisms of human relationships, identified the specific quality of contempt, the steadiness of the eyes, the flat geometry of the expression, as the most corrosive force in any human dynamic, far more damaging than anger because it communicates not frustration, but the complete absence of regard. What Preston saw on Elena's face was not even that. What he saw was colder than contempt. It was indifference, the kind that only belongs to someone who has already moved past you so completely that your destruction is not a victory, but merely a conclusion. He looked like he wanted to speak. No words came. Dante Ferraro was standing near the entrance. He hadn't been invited to the ceremony itself. He had come anyway, having understood from a single conversation on a balcony that something worth watching was about to happen here. He had done nothing to facilitate what he was watching unfold. Elena had not asked him for help. She had not needed it. He was simply the one person in the room who fully understood, from the first domino falling, that every single piece of this had been designed by the woman sitting quietly in the 3rd row. He looked at her across 400 people and a dissolving wedding and the rubble of Preston Hale's carefully constructed life. Elena finally looked up. Dante nodded once, not the nod of a man who approves, the nod of a man who has just recalibrated something fundamental about what he thought was possible. Later, in the hotel corridor, when the ballroom had devolved into the particular chaos of a high society crisis, he fell into step beside her without preamble. "You built that," he said. "I documented it," Elena said. "Reality built it." 27 months of records, he said. "I was thorough," she said. "There's a difference." Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he said something he had not planned to say, because Dante Ferraro did not make unplanned statements. "I have a problem that needs someone who thinks the way you think." Elena looked at him. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that lives in numbers that don't add up and in rooms where everyone is pretending they do." She considered this. "What's the arrangement?" "Equal," he said. "Not employment. Partnership." Elena Russo had spent 11 years being useful to men who treated her as a tool. She had learned, the difficult way, what it cost to give access to someone who would use it against her. But there is a specific quality that belongs only to people who have already proven something, to themselves and to anyone watching. And it is this: they do not need to perform confidence because they have already demonstrated competence. They can simply decide. "Tell me the problem," she said. "I'll tell you if I'm interested." Dante Ferraro smiled. It was a rare expression. It rearranged his whole face entirely. "That," he said, "is exactly the right answer." They walked out of the Whitmore Grand together, leaving behind 400 guests, one collapsed wedding, and a man who had believed that pain was something you could deliver to a woman and watch her carry alone. Preston Hale would spend the following 18 months navigating regulatory investigations, civil suits, and the specific social exile that follows a very public exposure. He had built his entire sense of self on the belief that he was smarter than the people around him, and that belief had made him careless enough to underestimate a woman who had sat in 27 months of silence and built a case so clean it required no confrontation, no raised voice, and no rescue from anyone. Some endings don't need the speech, they just need documentation. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had someone mistake your patience for weakness, hit the like button. It costs nothing, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be found. Subscribe because the woman walking out of that hotel isn't finished yet, and neither is the next story waiting for you here.